Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. This is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Hurston. I'm a second-year doctoral student and the host of Woke Wednesdays. And tonight we have a phenomenal panel. I've been talking to them for the past almost hour, and they're super cool, super awesome, super smart. And tonight we're talking about capitalism and its connection to mass shootings. So if y'all would like to introduce yourselves to the people who you are, what you do, or whatever you want to tell them.
Cool. I'm Allie. Hi. I'm an FIU student. I study theater, and I'm a member of an organization called One Struggle, which is an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist collective based in South Florida.
Awesome.
My name's Eric. I'm doing my undergrad at FIU. Studying sociology and anthropology and political science.
Triple major?
No, minor in political science,
okay.
major in sociology.
Still impressive.
That's pretty awesome.
And I'm also a member of One Struggle.
Hi, I'm Clara. I am a sociology major, a gender studies double major, and a philosophy minor. We're all One Struggle members.
Just get that out of the way.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm Ryan. I'm an FI student. I study political science.
Awesome. Also part of One Struggle.
Yeah.
And we have a lovely young person in the background too, live audience member, hanging out with us tonight. Alright, so this is an episode I think that we were talking earlier, it's gonna require a foundation, right? So let's jump right in. And yeah, if this is your first time tuning in, please feel free to post comments, ask questions. Tonight's kind of like a dense, kind of heavy conversation, so please feel free to ask questions. If you don't understand anything, if you disagree with anything, let us know. Tell us why. So what is capitalism? Is that
One is hard.
Is that a good question?
Yeah.
What do y'all think capitalism is? Have y'all heard of this term before? What do y'all think it is? How do y'all define it?
Okay, so capitalism, it's the economic mode of production we live under, and we talk about capitalism, we live in a capitalist society, but I think a lot of us don't really understand what that is and how it's broken down economically, politically, and socially, because our economic system affects all of those things and uses those things to propagate itself. So capitalism is a class-divided society. So we have the capitalist class, the ruling class, who own the means of production.
What are the means of production?
Okay. Well, you tell them.
No. So the means of production is literally everything we use to produce. So factories, land, raw materials, everything that goes into production, we call them the means of production.
Yeah, and so the main driving function of capitalism is this means of production, which is owned by the ruling class, and the exploitation of the workers who create these products and these commodities, which is the lifeblood of capitalism, surplus value. And so, yeah, somebody help me out here. Yeah, somebody.
So yeah, to kind of slow down,
Yeah.
it is a system we live under, right? Even though we may not all be able to put capitalism into words, we already know what it is because we live under it. So it is the class divided system, and it has a very
talking about social classes,
social
economic
class,
classes.
yeah.
Okay.
And its most important characteristic is that it runs on exploitation. It needs exploitation to survive. And who are the people that are exploited? The international working class. So when we say working class, it's not necessarily any person that does any kind of labor. Like a police officer is not a part of the working class, even though they get paid for it. The working class are the people who produce our goods. Everything, our tables, our chairs, everything that is material is produced by the working class.
So you said international working class. So is it possible to have a working class at a domestic level in the United States?
Yes.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
That are also being exploited for the purposes of capitalism.
For sure. I think we say international working class because capitalism is a global system and it requires domination of the planet for it to be effective. So from our perspective, we want to unify the working class because we see that they have the same interests, which is against the interest of the people, the ruling class. But of course, when you go to different places in different countries, there's different, national working class in Haiti, in the United States, In Bangladesh, there's different factions of the working class, and they have different, jobs.
So when you're saying also the working class, you're saying the people who are producing our tables, our chairs, what about, and I'm trying to make this, like, I guess on a tangible level, your person that works, at a McDonald's, would that person be considered someone who is being exploited under a capitalist system?
Sure, they would be considered a person dominated, but it's different than a person that is exploited, that is an actual worker, because a person that works in McDonald's is not producing any new values, not like creating a new product. It's just assembling, like the patty, the tomato. When we talk about the working class, it's the people who produce everything around us, who create these buildings, who create material value, right?
So the construction worker.
I feel
Construction
like a person working at McDonald's would still be considered part of, like, exploited in the working class.
dominated.
Well, still exploited, because, like, if we mention surplus value, which is, like, the additional wealth created by these workers, people working at McDonald's are still creating a surplus value.
What I mean, and also it should be mentioned that the precise definition of working class, there's different perspectives, like there's some people would consider, like a McDonald's worker or a Starbucks worker, yeah, they're part of the working class, and other people would say, no, I think they're more service workers, and like they're not actually producing surplus or like additional value. So yeah, like,
That's kind of like the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah,
let's not get too stuck on that.
Yeah.
But the point here is that exploitation, and by this, how are y'all defining exploitation? I know we kind of alluded to it right now, but it's kind of like taking advantage, overworking of people.
So surplus value. I think why we say mostly that workers are exploited, like, okay, so say like this shirt that I'm wearing right now, this was produced by someone, and a capitalist, produced it and sold it for, like $20. The person who produced this was likely paid pennies for their labor, and is like struggling to survive. For this to be bought at a $20 value, and the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, this is like the ruling class, this is their lifeblood. They need to push down wages constantly and raise prices for people, because that's how it works effectively. That exploitation is necessary in order for capitalism to be effective.
And I think that was very nice. Very
Thank
nice
you.
definition. No, yeah. Because we're trying to make this. We're talking earlier about making this type of information accessible to everyone, right? And that's kind of the hard part. I mean, you were talking earlier about we're used to just kind of being amongst ourselves. So okay, great. So we kind of have that. So capitalism needs exploitation in order for it to work, right? So another part that y'all said, it was capitalism. It needs to be global in order for it also to work, right?
Yes.
It can't just be like.
Yeah, it can't be refined to one place or one region. It has to dominate everywhere.
It's because capitalism has, like, this innate necessity to constantly expand, that's why we have, like, imperialism and colonization. Like countries like the United States building factories and trying to force, like, cheap labor in all these foreign countries, because it needs that so it can sell cheaper products like in the United States.
So I think in addition to the class characteristic, right? Like what defines capitalism? What makes capitalism be capitalism? 1, social class. 2, exploitation. And as Ryan said, the need for infinite growth. So capitalism needs to expand indefinitely. You can't. That's why companies are always seeking for more profit, for getting more money the next year. It's because capitalism needs to expand or it dies. It's an imperative that is built in the system. So that kind of ties into the part that we talk about, the crisis of capitalism. We as a group understand that capitalism is in crisis right now. And what do we mean by that? We mean that, we understand that capitalism needs infinite growth, right? However, we live on a finite planet. So that means that right now, the imperatives of capitalism are going to crash with the physical limits of the planet. So they're inherently at odds. You need, like, under capitalism, oil can't stay on the ground. Trees cannot exist. They need to be cut. right?
Yeah.
All of this exploitation is built into the system, and we're reaching a turning point that we can't go beyond. The earth can't provide for more growth.
So it's an exploitation not just of bodies, but of all, but
Of the planet.
what are of the planet turned into resources.
I-
Real quick, if y'all are just joining us, see different people are getting on. Tonight we're talking about capitalism and its connection to mass shootings. Before we get to mass shootings, we're trying to set a foundation for what capitalism is, and then we'll get to mass shootings. So again, if we say something that isn't understood, please feel free to ask questions. So yeah, you were about to say something, Ryan.
Yeah, I think an important part is they explain why it needs infinite growth is because capitalism depends on profit. So it continually needs to make this more and more wealth so it has to continue to exploit and exploit and exploit.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to like kind of realize that like she was talking about earlier, you know, like oil can't stay in the ground, trees can't, you know, they have to be cut and all of this stuff. It's because everything, the main motive for everything is profit, efficiency, everything. It's reproducing capitalism constantly.
Real quick question. So where are you getting all this information from? Who are you reading? Because I like to talk about, recommend like literature for people to kind of go read up on themselves. Don't believe us necessarily. Just like read up on it, right? And try to understand this on a different level. So where are y'all getting this information from? How are y'all backing up what you're saying?
I mean, we can talk about Marx. You know, we can talk all day about like different authors. There's Marx, there's Engels, there's Gramsci. There's like a whole Marxist tradition that can help us understand this. But I think the important point, like more than sticking to like things that were written like 100 years ago, you know, and trying to rigidly and mechanically apply them to reality, it's more like about understanding the core ideas and us being able to analyze the objective reality that we come from, right?
Absolutely.
So more than like rigidly applying theories, what we want to understand is get the tools and use them to analyze our reality, right?
And I mean also we need to be able to build our own political theories because, you know, like, well, yeah, like reading Marx and Engels, you know, some of that shit, I can curse, some of that shit is still applicable, you know, obviously, you know, like, don't throw it out, but we also need to be analyzing our current reality and our current moment and realizing, yeah, that, like, we can't rely on some old dude who's been dead for 100 years. We need to be creating our political theory in our interests, not in the interests of the people who run this economic system, our interests.
So question, and alright, so we got some comments, sorry. Nero de Cache is saying it's also funny that capitalism is fueled by innovation, yet when innovative ways are created to help the planet, people look the other way. Eric is saying, Eric from class, how are the critics of capitalism objective reality? Please explain. Or the criticisms of capitalism objective realities? I'm not sure if
I don't fully understand.
You mind clarifying a little bit, Eric? Eric is also a big Marxist.
Like it's not the criticism of capitalism that is the objective reality, because the criticism is already a subjective interpretation. But what we are confronted with is the objective reality, right? Things that are going on, things that are surrounding us, and part of that objective reality is the functioning of capitalism. It is this growth imperative. It is this the class division. All of that is part of the objective reality, and how we read that and how we decide to approach that is our subjective interpretation. So the criticism of capitalism is a subjective interpretation.
Is everyone understanding what we're saying? I keep on checking that because I know this is a lot that we're throwing at everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying a point you were getting to was that capitalism is in crisis. So what do you mean by that? Anyone?
Yeah. So like we mentioned before, just environmentally, physically, capitalism will reach a structural limit. This natural world cannot support the constant imperative growth. Capitalism is cyclical, and in order for it to be an economically viable system for capitalists, it needs to grow 3% annually from its previous growth each year. So it's like and that constant need for growth not only environmentally can't be supported, but also as it continues to grow, it's going to affect human lives, our democratic rights. At some point,
it already is,
like the economic system, it can't support, like education or healthcare. those need to be privatized. Those need to be private markets, and it's what we're seeing a lot of now. And that has a very, very real and human effect of, you know, fucking some fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to realize, like what you were talking about, you know, like privatizing healthcare and everything, that there are different variations, like of like different ideologies within capitalism, but it's important to realize when something is just perpetuating the same thing and over again.
Right. Yeah, which is goes into the understanding that so there are different classes, right? But there are also subdivisions in different classes. The capitalist class, the ruling class itself, is divided into different fractions.
Who do you define as the ruling class or the capitalist class here in the United States?
The people who own the means of production. And not just that, but also people who accumulate a lot of capital. Trump is part of the capitalist class. I don't know if he actually owns some sort of land or factory, but
He owns hotels.
right.
So he owns land.
But yeah, his interests align with keeping this economic system going. And I think, yeah, like, not all of us, or people in generally, you know, may not be critical of capitalism, but this economic system doesn't work in their favor. It works in the favor of a very, very small number of people, which is including, you know, like people who own means of production or people like Donald Trump who have a vested interest in this economic system continuing despite its real world results.
So it seems that there are very few capitalists.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot fucking more of us.
So Andrea's saying the criminal justice system has been privatized for years, and larger corporations capitalize on the cheap labor.
Yeah, absolutely.
B. Kitty is saying capitalism is modern slavery, and all its supporters will cause their own downfalls.
See, I agree with the first part of that statement, but I think people have been saying since the inception of capitalism, they've recognized this is not a sustainable economic model, and they've been saying since its inception, it's going to fuck itself up. It's going to cause its own destruction. And time again, it finds a way to adapt because capitalism has a lifeblood of its own. It has a need to survive, and it's very effective at finding new ways to survive and continue itself. So I hope, like, it would be great if I could just be like, yeah, it'll finish itself, but unless we actively work to combat it, I don't think it's gonna just implode, you know?
Right. Which is, I think, ties into what we're seeing right now. So, we see a lot of people starting to talk about fascism, right? People throwing this word around, fascism. What is fascism on a very fundamental level? More than just Mussolini or Hitler, fascism is the form that capitalism takes when it has to deal with crisis. Fascism is still capitalism, but it's like capitalism on steroids.
Yeah, like.
So it's a very autocratic approach that the dominant class uses when it realizes the system is fucking collapsing.
So it needs to organize itself very, very effectively and tightly, and that means a lot of repression. And like privatizing markets, making sure everything is a market, corporatism, you know?
Right. So as Ali was saying, capitalism is always going to find a way to reinvent itself and to survive, even in the face of the most like crazy decomposition, right? The worst crisis you can imagine. The capitalist class is always going to organize itself, even if it takes the most brutal regimes to survive. And that's what fascism is. And I don't think it will be any kind of exaggeration to say that Donald Trump is a fascist and that we're seeing a form of fascism rising in the United States.
Yes.
Would you say after 9/11, George Bush was really big on just go buy stuff, like let's pump money into the system. I think there's a good book. Oh, what's her name? Don't let any good tragedy go to waste.
I want to read that.
What's her name? Damn, I forgot. I'll get back to y'all. But is that would you say a type of fascism or a horrible crisis, right? 9/11, and then the answer to that is to spend more money.
I don't think it's necessarily fascism. I think that's effective capitalism.
Yeah.
And that's been, natural disasters throughout all of history. It has this veneer of offering aid, but in reality, it's working in the interest of creating more profit.
FIU does that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so let me see. We got another comment here. I wonder what would happen if Occupy and BLM got together. One of the strongest movements that attests to the need to improve capitalism is the Occupy movement. Occupy Wall Street, I'm guessing, is referring to.
Maybe, but I think what we're discussing is not wanting to improve capitalism, because I think we all recognize here that inherently it requires exploitation, destruction, and theft and slavery. So we're not advocating for improving or making a kinder version of capitalism.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not like saying like, oh, capitalism is broken, you know, it's not working. It's working exactly, in our view, it's working exactly how it should be.
This is a great trajectory.
This is
for
precisely how it's done. Yeah, it's.
Eric is asking, is this group defining capitalism as an international phenomenon? I think we are.
Mhm.
All right, or are y'all engaging it as economic systems adopted by states?
No.
So that's a no. And I think that implications would lead to important differences. So we are talking about this at an international level.
And we discussed earlier that capitalism as an economic system needs to be globally dominant for it to be an effective economic, social, and political system.
Right.
Medix is asking, can you explain how socialism and communism work against or with capitalism?
Okay,
Who wants to take that?
Okay.
Very simple question. Yeah.
We need to establish what level of discussion we're having here, because we are at a political moment where class consciousness is really low. Political consciousness in general is really low, right? People don't even know what capitalism is. So how can we talk about proposing an actual alternative to capitalism? How can we talk about doing away with capitalism, replacing it with something completely new, if people don't even understand what capitalism is? They don't understand it as a problem. So before we can talk about socialism, and before we can talk about the specific details of the system that is going to replace capitalism after the revolution or whatnot, we first need to understand what's going on right now and why it is a problem. Until we get to that point, there's no way to advance the conversation to defining a specific strategy to replace the system. And that's what kind of like one struggle is trying to accomplish. We're trying to create a space for people to recognize capitalism as our common problem, no matter where you're coming from. If you're coming from an environmentalist perspective, if you're coming from an anti-racist perspective, if you're coming from a feminist perspective, our common enemy is capitalism. And we need to expand that understanding in order to move forward in the conversation to talking about things like socialism.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point, because tonight, again, we were talking earlier, like this is a lot to take in.
It's a heavy conversation.
It's a heavy conversation. In that, I think we kind of distract from the point of tonight, and we can definitely have more episodes on these topics. That's not a problem. But for tonight, let's kind of stick to what capitalism is, and really how it's connected to mass shootings, which is I think what a lot of people are really interested in.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be, I'm always like kind of skeptical about saying if things are getting worse, but it's definitely more prevalent. It's more in our faces, at least.
Yeah.
Definitely with social media, right? So do we kind of have a foundation for capitalism? What do y'all think?
I think we're doing
I mean,
okay.
you want to ask them?
What do y'all think? Do we have
should we discuss it more?
a foundation of capitalism? So let's kind of do a quick recap.
Like
Right.
points.
Let's do some quick points.
Okay.
All right. So what are the main points of real quick, capitalism?
So capitalism is a class-divided system that requires exploitation, and that exploitation is at this point global and international. It's an international working class that is struggling to survive under the yoke of capital, right? Second point, capitalism cannot be reformed. It cannot be made into a kinder version, or a version that will look nicer to us, because we are not, the most directly exploited. Because those people in Haiti are producing our clothes. No matter how we look at it, no matter how many unicorns and hearts and pink shit we put on it, it's still exploitation. So it cannot be reformed. It has to be done away with. Third point, that we understand that capitalism is in crisis. So that means that capitalism is contending with the physical limits of the planet. It cannot sustain this growth anymore. And capitalism is facing a structural moment of really decomposition. The world can't take this economy anymore. The people are being exploited into unprecedented levels. Inequality is reaching unseen levels. And this reflects in our society in many ways. And one of them is mass shootings, which is what we're going to address now.
Yeah.
And also, another thing that y'all mentioned tonight, that capitalism continuously seeks to expand itself. right? So that was another.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, always expanding. Ever.
Jason's asking, as someone who knew nothing,
Jason, we go to school together.
I now feel like I have a basic understanding. Cool. How do you hustle the better part of 7 billion people into change?
That's, I mean.
So that's maybe we could say that for another episode. So it's funny because like this is the first time we've really addressed, we've mentioned capitalism and neoliberalism in passing on the show, but it's always like in relation to something else that we're talking about. So I think for the first time we're actually addressing it. So now a lot of folks just have just a lot of questions just about things that come to mind.
And really quick, I would say like it is an overwhelming kind of undertaking.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of us, and I think ideologically we've been trained to think that we are powerless, and that's not fucking true. Especially if we unite and organize together. It's totally possible. Maybe not in my lifetime.
And a quick plug, like y'all are a student organization here at Florida International University. Do y'all still meet over the summer? Yep. Where do y'all meet? Can you tell us a little bit real quick?
Well, we're meeting every other week, and I think this is kind of like a little bit more relaxed time because there's less population on the student campus. But I think at this point, kind of what we're aiming to do is really get prepared for the next semester and like hit the ground running with different events, different discussions. So we'll let you.
And y'all have an Instagram too, and I tagged them on the promo video today. onestruggle.fiu. And anyone can come, right? Even if they don't know anything about capitalism, they're just interested in learning.
Yes, we'll have events, and people can come and talk up to us. We have like one-on-one meetings. Sometimes you think like, hey, I may have some sort of unity with you. I think like it kind of aligns with what I'm thinking, but I'm not completely sure. Talk to us, like message us, we'll meet up.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this is really dope, and I mean, just in kind of meeting y'all tonight, they're extremely embracing and just open-minded, super cool people. Which org is everyone a part of? I missed it. Oh, One Struggle.
One Struggle.
One Struggle. And they have an Instagram account as well. So capitalism is in crisis. Right. One of its manifestations that we're seeing is with mass shootings.
Yeah.
Right. So let's kind of
go into some mass shooting shit.
There have been so many. The most recent one, I guess maybe Waffle House that we heard of. Parkland, right down the street from us.
And I think first we should say that like us discussing in this context, like we need to acknowledge the sorrow and pain of the people who experience this collectively and like individually. So like we're gonna talk about this in a political context, but it is very personal and it's a sensitive subject, and none of us would want to be insensitive or treat it as like a talking point.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's a great point.
I mean,
where do we start?
I'm tempted to read from this.
Don't read, just
do whatever you like, however y'all feel comfortable.
So I think like there's many ways in which we can see how capitalism is connected to mass shootings. I think we can start with, for example, the NRA. I think it would be a good starting point. I think you guys probably heard that the NRA is the National Rifle Association, and it is a lobby group, right? It is a lobby group that influences legislation on guns, and it is an extremely powerful group, and it literally buys out politicians irrespective of party. So you have people from the Republican Party, and you have people from the Democrats, and you have people from fucking green or independent parties that are bought by the NRA. And the role of the NRA is, of course, to prevent gun restrictive legislation from being passed. And it has a very you can't ignore the role of the NRA in mass shootings, right? That's one of the things that the students have been calling out. What's her name? Emma Gonzalez and the other students from Parkland have been saying, we call BS. Because that's what they're realizing, that the reach of the NRA is beyond imaginable. Right. Do you want to
and I think kind of going off of that, I think I don't want to get into electoral politics too soon, but I think the role of the NRA and irregardless, it's not a word, y'all.
Irrespective.
Irrespective.
We can make it a word.
It's a word.
Fine.
Fuck language snobs.
Yeah.
Regardless of party lines, the NRA plays an active role in buying out these politicians. Additionally, the Parkland shooter was a member of the JROTC in his school, in addition to white nationalist groups. But the JROTC is, they receive a lot of donations from the NRA, specifically putting those organizations in there and also preying on disenfranchised and, fucking poor youth whose opportunities are dwindling. So, yeah, we know that, the JROTC and these programs that the NRA put into schools, they seek out disproportionately poor, working class people who don't have any other options, which is ironic because, while schools are denied actual resources to teach people, we see that the reaction isn't to take away guns. The reaction is to push more guns into school because that is profitable for the capitalists and profitable for the NRA. And also on the other spectrum, you see kind of the loss of privacy. Those kids in Parkland who, a clear backpack, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of creepy. And schools are already like jails or institutions, and it's just actively contributing to kind of this weird dystopian, dehumanizing experience.
And to be fair, too, clear backpacks have been a thing for a long time now, too. My schools, but one thing, too, that I just forgot what I was about to say. I forgot. Please continue, sorry.
And it's also, I think, worth noting, while teachers, I think in Wisconsin, they recently passed the legislation where teachers are now allowed to be armed in schools.
Texas,
and
I think, right?
And simultaneously, their unions are being destroyed, so that
wages lagging.
Yeah, their wages are are horrible. So you're gonna offer a teacher a gun, which is profitable, but capitalism will not care for them. They won't offer them a living wage, and they definitely will not make schools safer. In fact, the private security system, industry is booming. It's doing great. As well as charter schools, it's preying on the fears of parents and students. It's using this opportunity to privatize and make more money rather than focusing on the safety of students, because capitalism doesn't give a fuck. They want money.
I think that's a point that needs to be made really strongly, because people tend to emphasize greed as the reason why these things are happening. These people are so greedy. It's not greed. It's built into the system. When we talk about teachers being expected to arm themselves in the classroom, it's not just about it doesn't make sense, why that's a stupid idea. No, it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of people who are trying to sell more guns, because now you have another source of profit. You have to have teachers who will have to have guns, and someone will have to produce these guns, and people who produce the guns are the working class. That's what we're talking about. Everything is connected on a global scale, and what the point we're trying to make is that capitalism cannot actually account for the well-being of children. It cannot account for the safety of children, because its imperative is to expand profit, and that's always going to supersede human life. It's always going to be more important than human life.
Unless it's good for capitalism, it's just...
And also, we can look at the profile specifically of the shooter and his tendencies towards misogyny, white supremacies, phobia, and oh shit, I totally lost my train of thought. Fuck.
No, but all of that is related to the crisis of capitalism. I saw an article saying that, I don't know how you call it, the magazines, for the gun, how do you call that? The magazines, right? That's how you call it?
The bump stocks?
Yeah, they had swastikas in them.
Yeah.
For the
propaganda,
actual Nazi swastikas.
Oh, the bullets.
Oh, the shooter, his actual bullets.
Casings.
His casings had
swastikas
swastikas carved into them.
Okay.
He was a straight up, fucking Nazi.
Yeah.
And that's also how we see kind of this crisis pushing people towards this alternative, what they think is an alternative or an effective alternative of fascism or fascistic tendencies, white supremacist tendencies, xenophobic tendencies.
Yeah.
And it's a part of this anger, this outrage, especially I think for white males who feel they're losing their entitlements because capitalism is now finally starting to affect them. And like the crisis is growing so much that it's reaching out to places where it didn't affect people before.
Can you break that point? That I think that's a really interesting point. Can you break that down a little
Yeah.
bit more? You're saying that for white males, capitalism's finally starting to affect them. Therefore, their reaction is
Yeah. If I can, okay, so like I don't want to talk shit about Occupy Miami was cool. It was a mobilization of people, but I think that's an example of people who previously were doing okay under capitalism who are now actually feeling the effects, of not being able to go to school, not getting a job where they can survive, or, you know, like not receiving health care or not receiving education. Now capitalism is at this point where it can't afford to do that shit for people that it used to do for. So now they're feeling these reaction, or this what's the word? Backlash. That's what it is. They're feeling this backlash, and it makes them angry because they had these entitlements before that they were allowed. And so, like, you see the Occupy movement, which was, you know, largely like middle class students who weren't, you know, necessarily critical of capitalism, but recognized that, yo, we were entitled to shit before, and we're not getting it anymore, and we're upset. And I think that's part of, you know, like the inspiration of like white supremacy, and yeah, like white nationalism is that like it's not because there's immigrants, it's not because there's people of color, it's because capitalism cannot fucking take care of you anymore.
Exactly.
And there's an anger and a rage that is built that is misplaced.
So one of the critiques.
I think an important part is that you need to talk about how like the aspects of how capitalism affects us emotionally. It creates this social isolation where we're competitive with one another. So like a lot of times, look at the MO of like the mass shooters. They're oftentimes like mental illnesses. They're lone wolves, like outcasts. It is a distinct part of capitalism that it creates like people competing against each other.
Yeah.
So
I was about to ask. So capitalism is a constant creation, and this is everything we've been saying. It's what you're saying. Competition for just. I mean, we see this within ourselves. I mean,
Right.
one of the critiques of capitalism is, of anti-cap. Capitalist perspectives is that it's very reductionist, right? So it kind of seems that like everything stems from capitalism. So misogyny or racism, and maybe this might be a question for like another day. But I am kind of curious. In addition to absolutely, it's all connected. We're not saying that are we saying that it's creating these things, or are we saying it's connected to these?
I think there are different factors that play into the conversation. When we talk about mass shootings, yes, we need to talk about misogyny. We need to talk about male fragility. We need to talk about white supremacy. We need to talk about
homophobia,
homophobia,
racism,
all of these stuff, xenophobia. We need to talk about all of these things, even mental health to a certain extent, are a part of the conversation. But the survival of capitalism is predicated in this way that people are going about guns and are going about mass shootings, right? The survival of capitalism is predicated in putting profit over people's lives, and that's something we need to understand. Because yes, we can rant all day about white supremacy, we can rant all day about misogyny, but if we don't understand that this economic system needs these things to survive, we're going to go in cycles, and we're going to reform capitalism. And that's not a transformative approach.
And I would say, you know, like all those isms, sexism, racism, you know, like homophobia, I don't think capitalism didn't create those things. I think it utilizes them and creates new forms of them because it is beneficial to it to have those different structures of oppression like built within it. It's always had those built within them, and they grow and expand and reform.
Yeah.
And I think that's also kind of like the intricacies of like y'all's argument,
Right.
which is good to talk about too.
It's like Ali was talking about. Like when we talk about the crisis of capitalism, we're not the only ones that see it. We're not the only ones that recognize that capitalism is in crisis. Those fucking people on the other side, they know it too. Trump knows that capitalism is in crisis. Yeah. The white supremacists know that capitalism is in crisis. The Republicans know that capitalism is in crisis. What is the alternative that they are proposing? And it is an alternative of recuperation of capitalism, of trying to make it survive. And that's why we see the growth of these super authoritarian like narratives We see the growth of ultra right-wing groups. We see the growth of white supremacist groups, of anti-LGBT groups. We see fucking neo-Nazis. Like the other
Taking
day,
the fucking streets.
yeah, like we saw it in Virginia the other day. People burning a swastika. Like,
Charlottesville?
Huh?
Charlottesville, is that what you're talking about?
Oh, there was one that's recently.
No,
Yeah,
recently in Virginia,
oh,
like
yeah.
actually burning a swastika.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm from North
There's-
Carolina. We see that stuff. Yeah.
and like Ali was saying, these people realize, they feel the crisis. They see that something is wrong. And their reaction is reactionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
the
not,
response,
it's
yeah.
not by mistake. That ideology is placed specifically so that when people feel like, oh, like, I'm not able to survive, you know, like how my grandparents did, the automatic reaction is not, I should be critical of capitalism. The ideology is placed so that you can blame immigrants, so that you can blame people of color, so that you can blame, you know, oh, they outsourced all the fucking, you know, jobs to China. That's why, you know, we're having a hard time. It's none of that shit. It's capitalism as an economic system.
Which is interesting when people do critique the outsourcing of jobs. It seems like that's kind of a critique of capitalism.
It is.
Right, but they don't understand it as such. Which
Like-
is really, go ahead.
Do you mind if I grab a bottle of water?
Oh, yeah, I'll get you one.
And I mean, I think it's important to realize, like, while we're talking about these things, like, to think about what movements are and aren't controlled. Like we were talking about before, like everything with like the swastikas, you know, the alt-right movement. They have police there to protect them, to help them, you know, carry out their movement or whatever. We have an event, or we have a movement, or a protest, or whatever, and we're the ones being policed, we're the ones being enforced. It's not good. What we do is not good for the capitalist, so it's condemned.
Yeah.
It's policed by the state, you know.
I
We're not
feel like
protected.
you can see that a lot when you talk about gun control. That you notice that in the 60s, when left-wing groups, the Black Panthers, were arming themselves, you saw many, like, both Democrats and Republicans, like, pushing for gun control. And then you see, like, right-wing groups arming themselves, and no one's pushing for gun control on that.
And it's also racialized. It's also extremely racialized, right? Black Panthers being black people.
Yeah.
You can't have black people with guns. 'Cause that, which goes to the combination.
Right.
Yeah.
Alright,
I think like gun violence has always been present, right? Gun violence has always existed in Black and Latino and poorer neighborhoods. Like gun violence has been present all this time, but because capitalism's in crisis now, it needs to go to spaces where it didn't go before. It happens in Parkland. Parkland is a white, like wealthy neighborhood. These issues are touching them right now. And capitalism cannot afford to maintain these progressive veneers anymore. It needs to keep the guns there, and it needs to arm those professors. And that's what Ali is getting at when she's saying that these issues are finally starting to affect the people that they didn't affect previously. We see the same thing with environmental stuff now. It's always been okay to fucking exploit environment in so-called in third world countries, right? In dominated countries where environmental legislation is basically inexistent. It's always been okay to fucking destroy the
rainforest.
The rainforest. It's always been okay to fuck up
And
those
to
places.
poison rivers, yeah.
But now it's coming to our backyard. There's fracking happening here in Florida. They're building the Sabo Trail here in Florida.
Yeah.
And that's because capitalism needs to continually expand and extract profits even in situations where it's completely saturated. It cannot take profits anymore.
Well, and I mean, that's also interesting talking about fracking in Florida because I think the environmental studies showed that, like, the oil that exists in the ground in Florida, A, is not that much, and B, is not a quality that most oil companies, like, 20, 30 years ago would even want. But now the fact that it's so scarce and, we're running out of resources, even if they wouldn't have taken that shit 20 years ago, you bet your ass they're going to pull it out of the ground now.
I want to read some of these comments real quick. Q asked a question, which is like the question the $1 million question, right? How does the people go about dismantling capitalism, and what system would you think would best work? And maybe that's we can get some of it here.
Well, we can talk about that in the end.
The masses need to learn how to lobby. Maybe goes back to your point about electoral politics.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
Yeah,
I was
let's
gonna
talk
say,
about
like,
electoral politics.
Power should be controlled by honest people, is what B Kitty is saying, and then Kai is saying. Too much power can make an honest person dishonest, though. When have white people not mobilized when something was affecting them? Not the green ones. Let's see. One struggle.
That's
Sadvan.
Okay. I'm not sure what that.
He said something Russian.
Yeah.
Zdra-
Привет, как дела? I don't know what that means.
It was really good.
It's impressive.
Let's see. White millennials are experiencing what people of color go through anytime there's a movement. What type of role do you think that the civil rights Black Panthers had on capitalism? That's y'all are asking these questions that
Yeah,
are
it's
like
a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of branch.
which is it's great. It's great. We can
Yeah.
maybe do some other episodes on this.
The EPA is a joke. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
But, all right, cool. Let's see. Okay, yeah. But you also mentioned a point about poor communities, which also can relate everything back to capitalism. Right? It creates these poor communities and it creates the need for just for all. You can just tie it all back to everything.
Yeah.
But I think you were gonna say something.
Oh no.
Okay. So I think y'all have made it pretty clear about how capitalism is connected to mass shootings. Did everyone kind of get that point? Did everyone understand that? I think y'all did a pretty good job of just connecting. We're saying a lot
Yeah.
in a small amount of time. But the other component is, because we see a lot of groups, a lot of organizations that Parkland, the children of Parkland,
Right.
I think they're extremely admirable. I think they're extremely courageous. These are amazing kids just speaking up. But one of, I think, y'all's contentions with that is that their response to this is, they even say, like, we're about to be 18 and we're going to vote you out. So, which is electoral politics, which is something that a lot of people look towards as a way of change in the United States. So just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think, like, obviously, first of all, we should, like, recognize
Yeah.
their efforts.
Yes.
They've been
absolutely.
extremely,
Yeah, yeah.
like, extremely militant. They've been extremely effective in, like, mobilizing people. But
It's amazing, actually.
Yeah,
how they've
it's
been able
really
to mobilize.
impressive.
Unprecedented on many levels.
Yeah.
And it goes back to your point about power. Who gets to have power? I mean, they're showing us that children also have, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Power, yeah.
But a bit of a counterpoint to, like, the power part was, what power is effective, like, in terms of politics. Like, whose democracy is this? This isn't our democracy. It's only really a democracy when it suits the capitalist class,
Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, so like what these students are pushing for is not good for the NRA, it's not good for the gun lobby, it's not good for the manufacturers of guns, and it's not good for the state. So what we really have to think about is, whose movement is this? When is it going to be effective, When all of these students die and they organize a movement around it, nothing really happens. We have to pay attention to, first of all, who are these students that are organizing? When are people paying attention? When is change happening? Change is finally happening when it suits the people that are in power, when it suits the people that are creating, all of these, that own the means of production, all of these things. So we don't really have a democracy until people have their own power, when power isn't in the hands of the capitalists. So
Yeah, I think a point that needs to be made, like, first understanding what's the platform that these people are using to advocate, right? Like, what is their project, right? When we talk about them, I'm talking about the students in Parkland, right? The March for Our Lives students, Emma Gonzalez and
David
others.
Hogg,
Yeah,
yeah,
all of those people. What are they advocating for? They're advocating for electoral change, right? They're advocating to vote people out, people who are funded by the NRA, right? That's positive. That will, like, we need to recognize, like the extent that can be combated, right? Like, that it is a form of change. However, we need to understand how that, like, it not only doesn't combat the system, but it actively collaborates with it.
Yeah.
And why are we saying this? It is because the electoral system, regardless of party, collaborates with capitalism. It doesn't matter if it's Republican, if it's Democrat, if it's Green, if it's Independent Party. All of those people are there to uphold the interests of a capitalist class, and it's bound to happen because there is no other way those people will stay in power. Even Bernie Sanders, or people who come with very
Progressive.
progressive, platforms and all that stuff, they are absorbed when they get there, because it is only by compromising and by getting agreements with capitalists and with donors and all those people. It is only doing that they can stay in power and that they can stay there.
So real quick, Erica's saying that you talk about movement, but I don't see movements for voting against Trump at the next election. There's a lot of complaining. All talk, no action, millennial mentality. So I kind of don't want to. I want to.
Let's not skewer anybody.
But let's continue, because what y'all are saying, just to be clear, is that electoral politics can, to a degree, it can be, I don't know if the word is good, but it can be somewhat progressive, right? Positive, voting out the NRA or getting rid of the NRA, yada yada yada, right? But what you're saying is that ultimately, and by electoral politics I mean going to vote. That's what I'm voting, right? Voting new people in and out. That ultimately it will consume the person who gets voted in or voted out, and they will perpetuate ideals of capitalism.
I think an important part, like they were mentioning earlier, that all like the reasons how like shootings are connected to capitalism is that voting for people isn't going to change those fundamental issues. Is taking away all guns isn't going to create like stop white supremacists, isn't going to stop these people who want to enact violence.
Yeah. So, and like, you know, we're talking earlier about how it's a class divided society, all of this, you know, you have the bourgeois and the working class. What we live in is very much a bourgeois democracy. As I said earlier, you know, the people in power, all that stuff. But we have to think about, we have gained like certain rights under, you know, democracy and with electoral politics and all this stuff. But think about the context that these things happen in. The only time when you gain, you know, democratic rights like the 8-hour working day or, you know, all of this stuff is when capitalism can afford to give you that. We were talking earlier about how
and it's never through voting. It's by people going in the streets and fucking putting pressure
and demanding
exactly. You know, like Occupy Miami, while it was, you know, important.
What is
it's
Occupy
important.
Miami? What is that?
And it's part of like the larger Occupy.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a chapter here.
Oh, okay. So there's like a okay.
Yeah. Like all of these things happened when it affected the people, like the middle class basically is what you could call it. So yeah, like it's like I said before, change only happens when it suits the capitalist class, when it's able to.
An interesting point that Glada made is that the changes could still be positive, right? So the question, I think it's like a resurfacing question that all right, so what's the alternative, right?
Okay.
And it's this, because we were talking about earlier before the show how it's just so everywhere. It's I mean it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe like a whole like several episodes to talk about like an alternative.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems that while these children in electoral politics will kind of be consumed or is consumed, reconsumed by capitalism. The Democratic Party, it is still a potentially positive thing. But one of y'all's points, which I love, is the international perspective. While it might be a little helpful in the United States for some folks, there will always be poor people in a capitalist state. There will always be people being exploited.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure if that's kind
of sorry. Go.
Fuck, now I forgot what I was going to go.
I honestly kind of don't know what I was gonna say, but I'm gonna start talking.
Alright, so real quick, so Instagram kicks us off after an hour, so I have to end it and restart it. Capitalism. So I feel like what we're about to say is gonna take a little while, so I'm gonna end it and then I'm gonna restart it.
Cool. Stick around, you guys.
Okay, that way, come back, join us for the second hour. Probably won't be here the whole hour.
Well, what about our titties?
I'll start. So just come back, y'all. All right.